Another element is the plot. We have already been talking about it, but let's see it. So, the most, let's say, minimal definition of a story is the answer to the question of what happened. So if you can answer to the question of what happened, that's already a storyline. And that's the beginning of a story. And the whole, let's say, point of a story is it needs to provide chain of events. So since his skis crossed, he fell in the snow. So we represent cause and effect. Something happened. And this is what I've been talking about, let's say this curve that we also have been learning in our high schools and primary schools. And when you think about it, this is our hero, and in the beginning there's exposition. Now everything's normal, but just something is starting to happen in his phone. And then it's the rising action. You know, there comes a bad spirit out of his phone and attacks him. And you don't know whether the hero will win or not. So the climax is where the hero actually transforms and shows his powers and fights back. And now we already know, okay, now it's very likely we win. Yeah, fight. Huh? And now you probably, he'll win. And at the end, so he wins over the phone and knows how to use his phone actually. That's how I feel sometimes if I need to change from an old phone to a new one. And if you go back to this story, you remember I said that Slovenes like it much better than our own Slovenian commercial for the faculty. And if you watch this story, it's a classic example of how it follows this structure. So first, it's the child actually finds a gift somewhere, and then it goes into creating suspense. So he's following what's happening here on the airplane. So and the peak of it is actually where he gets discovered. When his mother calls him and he falls off, and you don't know, okay, what's the role of the Santa here? And the Santa on the peak is actually, you think he's performing the role of the bad guy. No? You don't know whether the child will get punished or not. So that's an interesting element. And then, but of course, the Finnish student already knew that he will not be the bad guy, and probably also the Slovenes. But then it goes into, let's say, a normal state, and at the end, he also gets a big amount of presents. So, and now that we know how a story looks like, what are its elements, let's talk about the three main fields of storytelling in tourism. First is the destination image formation, second is tourism product formation, and the third is means of interpretation. And I'll talk about all three of them. So if we're talking about storytelling as destination image formation, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's a classic classification of agents, basically sources of how the destination image is formed. And we could divide them into three sections. The first is when it's induced, when the image of the destination, for example Slovenia, is created by someone who has a vested interest. For example, a Slovene destination marketing organization has a vested interest of you coming to Slovenia. So they would be in overt induced form 1. So traditional forms of advertising belong here. Overt induced number 2 is information received, for example, from tour operators or wholesalers, like someone who's working in Finland and taking Finnish tourists to somewhere else in the world and would say to them, okay, here's Slovenia and here's Croatia, the benefits of this are this and the benefits of this are that. They do have vested interest, they want to get you there, but they're more autonomous in terms of you trust them more that they will tell you the truth about Slovenia and Croatia. And for example, Slovenia will say, come here, it's great, don't go to Croatia, for example. Or if you're going to Croatia, visit us also. The third is covert induced number 1. And what is this actually is, for example, if you're using a famous person in an advertisement, and you're taking the credibility of that famous person saying, okay, this year I'm vacationing in Slovenia. No. and you trust that person more, but at the same time that person got paid for doing that. At the same time it is a commercial, that's why it belongs to this covert induced version. And covert induced number 2 is basically overt means that it's shown, that you know about it, and covert means it's hidden. So if you're using famous people, people don't think directly, okay, he was paid for that advertisement. Or covert induced number 2, if you're using newspapers and you are publishing an advertisement which does not look like an advertisement. And ethical, especially if you're looking at it from a journalist angle, that's not ethical. You know, material that's actually an advertisement, you should know that it's an advertisement, but it still happens. So, and it's very common still. So this is where it belongs to this hidden but still induced image formation. A second character, let's say a second category of destination image formation is our autonomous sources. So these are journalists, for example, who really are autonomous. Or we'll talk about it, there are also stories that we use for a destination. And the third one are organic sources. So they could be unsolicited. Like for example, my grandmother went to France for the first time in her life, and when she came back, she had a magazine of France with her. And anyone who had 1 minute of time had to sit down with her.